The previous session was focused on the remarkable contribution of Paul Ricoeur to hermeneutical theory. In this session, we will look at the basic requirements for a holistic and inclusive hermeneutic, and that will prepare the ground in the next session to look at developing an historical consciousness when doing hermeneutics. Now, if we look back at what we've discussed up to now, it could sound really overwhelming. So many aspects, so many dimensions, so many perspectives we must keep in mind. But I would like to bring us back again to that very simple model we worked with right from the beginning, that reduces the communication to a sender, a message, a receiver, and then the feedback loop that goes with that. Because this gives us some direction and some map to know where we are and what we are doing at a certain moment in the complexity of what we're dealing with. The challenge of a hermeneutic that is effective is that it should cater for all aspects of the communication process. We can concentrate on one aspect at a certain time, but to be really effective, a hermeneutic must address all the essential components of the process. And that means we have to give account of all these dimensions. Now, in order to do that, let us go back to the very simple model that we've used to explain the communication process, where we talked about a sender, message, receiver, and of course then the feedback loop from the receiver back to the sender and the hermeneutical spiral that follows. Now there are three important areas, as has been marked here on the diagram, and each of them require a different set of skills. So remember, if you're a systematic theologian, you're not a one-string musician. To be a systematic theologian, you need a set of skills, many of a very different kind of skills. But these are your tools, the tools of your trade, and you must develop a competency in each of them. Now, the first area is the relationship between the sender and the text. That is the first dimension. And that is par excellence, the historical dimension. That is how did the text come into being, what was the situation or the event of understanding, what were the contextual conditions which produced this original understanding. So every systematic theologian has to develop a clear understanding of what history is, how history works, and how history is written. And as we come to the historical dimension, we will see that it is not alone focused on the past or dealing with the past. In fact, a lot of the past is left behind. It is the way that the past influences the future. So a systematic theologian has to deal with the historical dimension because, as we said in the previous session, the documents he or she is working with are historical in nature. They come from a certain place and time, but they also talk about events in the past. So this is an essential component of your skill kit. And the better historian you become, the better you will also be a systematic theologian. Remember, there was a time when doctoral exams had the history of doctrine as a compulsory subject. Exegetes, historians, practical theologians, whatever, in Holland, as part of the Reformed tradition, had to take this course in the history of dogma, or the history of doctrine, because it's such an essential element. So this is the area what we call the world behind the text, what precedes the text. And that in itself is an important area of concentration. Now, the second area follows in the middle section, which is, of course, the message, or we could say this text. And that means the structural format in which the message comes to us. Now, here again, you might not be a linguist, and you might not think this is your competency. But there's no way around it that you have to develop the skills of analyzing a text, on parsing a text, knowing what is the subject, the predicate, the conditions, the whole way that the norms of the text works and how it produces its meaning. So delving into linguistics, into literary theory can only be to your advantage. So again, a systematic theologian, in actual fact, is a jack of all trades, but hopefully a good jack at all of these trades. So indulge in linguistics. Try to understand how text is constructed, because that will help you not only to analyze the text properly, but also to construct texts that are clear and persuasive. So that is the second area of competence, and that is the world of the text. As we've seen from Ricoeur, that it is not only a textual structure, but it contains within itself the potential to open up worlds, and to offer alternatives. So this is, for that reason, and for the future orientation of interpretation, important that we develop this skill as good as we can. The third area of concentration is the relation between the text and the receiver. And this is really the future dimension of the text, or we can call it the world in front of the text. We can't arrive at the world in front of the text without going through the two previous phases, and therefore it requires a skill of its own. So the way that is opened will be explained in a little bit more detail when we come to the discussion of the future-orientated nature of the text. It will come to the fore when we talk about the way that possibilities are opened in front of the text, when we talk about the proposed world of the text, as we have done already in the previous sections, but that will be the third area of concentration. So if we summarize, when we bring these skills together, all of them must serve the purpose to find the essential thrust of the text. Interpretation is not only about identifying who the text is about, what is the story, what are the circumstances. It is to get a feel for and to follow the thrust, the future thrust of this text. What is it aiming at, and what does it want to achieve? There's a wonderful phrase used by Robinson, developed to talk about the trajectory of a biblical text. And I think that explains it very, very well. Analyzing the text gives you a feel or an insight into what direction this text is moving, what it opens up, and that future trajectory of the text is really what we're looking for to when we combine these hermeneutical skills in developing a holistic understanding of hermeneutics. So the final word in this regard is to say that we must then consciously be aware of what is the audience we are addressing when we propose these new possibilities. And I think there David Tracy can help us all to say, look, there are three audiences. There's the audience of academe, where scholars talk with other scholars, and it has a sort of aura of its own. Sometimes it is just complicated to be complicated to impress others. So this is a very small audience, and it has its own function. And then the second public is the believing community, where people who share the same basic values or intentions come together and talk to one another again. The real challenge lies in the third public, and that is the public that do not share your presuppositions or your faith basis. People who could be totally skeptical about it. People on the marketplace. But nonetheless, these are the people, if we really want to change what happens in society, that we need to convince. One of the biggest mistakes that theologians make is to address the public or the public they're speaking to in the language of another public. Let me try to explain that. If people from the church community used to talk to the second public, the believing community, talk to the third public, people that do not share their presuppositions, that are not necessarily people of faith, secular, skeptical people, then they must be very aware that they must talk in a language that meets the expectations of that public. It's no use using the language of the second public to talk to these people. Then you are just preaching to people without understanding where they come from and what their points of departure is. But if you want to change society and take with you the wider public, then you need, these are the people you need to convince, and these are the people that you have to speak to meaningfully. And this is not impossible. I mean, if you take a universal value like respect, you can motivate that from religious perspective, but you can also motivate that from a non-religious perspective. The Constitution of Poland has this wonderful starting point. Poland is a very strong Roman Catholic country, but is also a very strong secular, non-believing part of the population. And the Constitution says these values are supported by those that believe in God, and these values are supported by those that do not believe in God. So this is the challenge for people speaking from a believing community to do that effectively in the language of a different public.